This episode of From Angel to Exit is brought to you by Dash. Dash offers remote knowledge workers to streamline workflows for U.S. businesses. Services include CRM management, email organization, social media content, bookkeeping, research, lead generation, and more. Dash professionals save clients time by managing routine tasks, allowing businesses to focus on growth and other high-value activities. For more information, visit hirewithdash.com. Are you serious about planning a successful business exit? From Angel to Exit is your go-to resource. Subscribe to our newsletter at eckfeldt.com/podcast for even more valuable insights. And to get personalized guidance, take our free exit readiness assessment. It's just 24 questions, and it will give you a clear picture of your exit readiness. Find the assessment at eckfeldt.com/exit. Submit your results, and we'll schedule a free follow-up call to discuss your specific situation and the best way to maximize your valuation and ensure a successful transaction. Now, back to the episode. Welcome, everyone. This is From Angel to Exit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Our guest today, Scott Allison. Scott is co-founder of Allison Marketing. We're going to hear about his journey, the work that he's done, the exits he's had, and I think more importantly, what he's doing today. I think there's a lot of insight in terms of how Scott has approached this whole process, this whole journey, and really some smart things he's done to set him up for the next stage. And I'm excited to have that conversation and hear what he's done. But so with all that, Scott, welcome to the program.
Bruce, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed looking at your podcast in the past, seeing your content, and totally aligned with a lot of your philosophies too. So appreciate being on.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here. And as a fellow EOer, I always love having you on the program. So,
EO, been at 23 plus years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great journey. Before we kind of dig into the business and the exits, I'd love to just kind of understand a little bit of your personal background. Like how did you get into business originally? What was your professional kind of studies? Did you always want to start a company? Like what was the...
Well, yeah, I know we can dive into it. And the short answer is no. I never did think I was going to start a business. So that was kind of the reluctant entrepreneur. But, when I went to San Diego State University and I pursued a degree in journalism. And initially I thought I was going to be a reporter. And, I thought that was the approach. As I graduated, started getting close to graduation, it was really difficult to get a job in journalism, and the pay was not that great. So I took an internship with a U.S. Senator, Pete Wilson, my last semester in college. And when I graduated, I got hired by a political consulting firm. 3 days after graduation, I was on a plane to Texas, and they dropped me into Dallas and was working on the 1986 Texas governor's race and the Louisiana Senate campaign. So it was a baptism by fire. You take a California kid and throw him into Southern politics. And I think politics is a great spot for young people to cut their teeth, but it is for young people. And so when I finished that, I headed to San Diego without a job, and because I really had nowhere else to really go. I didn't want to move back home. I'm going to go back to San Diego. It was great. And I got a job with a small PR firm there. And I spent 12 years there, Bruce. It was good, too, because it was a generalist firm, and I got a chance to learn a lot of different things, a lot of different industries, from tech, healthcare, consumer, entertainment, you name it. I had a chance to work on it. And after 12 years, I was a partner in the firm, part owner of it. But then 1999 came around. If you harken back to those days, is when the internet was just exploding, and the .com was exploding, and the entire world was San Francisco back then. And I had an opportunity to join a kind of a high-flying internet PR firm to join their team and run their San Francisco office, run their LA office, and got a chance to really work on, Disney.com, Nordstrom.com, a lot of the Priceline, a lot of the early stage, really strong .com companies. I also met Andy Hardy-Brown, and Andy was the chief operating officer of that company. And so we had a great year and a half, and then you cut to 2001 and things started to get really, really rough. And you know what, a high-flying internet PR firm in 2000, you know how this is going to end. And so Andy and I did everything to try to, pull this thing together. They named me president of the company. It was kind of like being told, good news is you're the captain of the ship. Bad news, we hit an iceberg about 100 yards back. So, it was summer of 2001, and Andy and I were sitting at a small cafe in San Francisco. We're like, God, what are we going to do? This thing is not sustainable. And we, the more drinks we had this, Andy scribbled all down on a napkin. Why don't we start our own firm? And so we went to the owner of this existing firm, and the company had offices in London, New York, San Francisco, and LA. And we kind of proposed, why don't we take the West Coast off your hands? And we'll take those offices, we'll take the employees, and you'd have the lease obligations, and we bought it for $1.
Yeah.
And this was September 4th, 2001. And then I felt like we had overpaid because 9/11 hits, and the economy absolutely tanked, and it was brutal. I mean, I think we were probably too dumb to realize that we were bankrupt at some point, but we just kept going. We kept building, and you flash forward to now, and it's 52 offices, 1,000 people, around the world, 100 million in revenue. But it was a pretty auspicious start.
Yeah. I guess. And when did you feel like you were really kind of ready, or you had the kind of the chops to take over as kind of as in a CEO role? Like, I'm always curious the kind of the leadership journey people are on.
Well,
like, what was that like?
You had asked, well, did you think you would start a company? If you had asked me in June of 2001, do you think you'll have your own agency company? I would have said, oh no, not at all. Because it just looked like such a brutal mountain to climb, particularly if you were going to start off sitting in a back bedroom in your boxer shorts, trying to launch a company. But I think we had to move so fast. We had 3 weeks to raise the money, and there was no thinking about it. You just leapt in, and all of a sudden you wake up and say, wow, now I have a company. CEOs, it was a 12-person startup that we launched. So it was not like being the CEO of General Motors, right? It was small. So I always said I had a chance to learn as I went, and really learned by doing. And at every phase, then you cut to the end of it when it was an international company, all these people, all these offices. That's when you kind of really learned your stripes. But I think some of the core philosophies that Andy and I sketched out on that napkin, we said, we want this to be a place where people and clients stay for a long time, really void of politics, really a chance for people to, what we sketched out on that napkin lasted all the way to the 52 offices. It was the foundation that we never really wavered from.
Yeah. You talk about the journey, kind of learning as you're going. Any important inflection points for you in terms of, changes you had to make as a leader, right? As the company kind of grew, any big breaks for you?
There was breaks, and there's lessons learned. And it's funny because I was not a big conference guy, going to conferences. I rarely had time, but I actually went to, and it was one of their very first EO Alchemy events. Down in Los Angeles, and they really pulled it. It was a great event, and what really resonated, I remember there was a guy. He was the CEO from LegalZoom.
Oh yeah,
and he had a great topic. He said the difference of being a $25 million company and scaling to a $100 million company. Well, and it was really interesting because we were at about a $20 million company at the time. But his real focus on when he goes, at a $25 million company, everybody's a generalist. You get to a $100 million company, everybody's got to be a specialist. And that really stuck with me. And I think as we evolved and grew, I really had to look at people and say, you're a generalist, and now I got to get you focused on what you really specialize in. And, there was a concept, like we reached the point where we needed a CFO. Well, then we reached the point we needed a global CFO, somebody who had really done it before and could run, 14 different companies within, 14 different currencies and all. You had to keep raising your game and bringing in people that were true specialists. And I had to kind of keep winnowing down what was on my plate. So by the time I was the CEO of the $100 million company, I had a lot less responsibility and direct reports than I did at the $25 million, where you're touching everything, right?
Yeah. You still have your fingers in a lot of pies.
Right.
How? I'm just curious about timing on those things, because I find that can be a real challenge, for founder CEOs, is figuring out, when do I kind of get that next level resource in place, and I don't want to do it too early, right? Because I don't want to invest. I don't want to spend the money, and I don't want to bring them in if there isn't the work because they get bored and they're going to leave. But I don't want to be too late.
It's a fantastic point, Bruce. And I think, I never could have done this alone. And I think to have a co-partners that you're building with. So Andy Hardy Brown and I, we started this together. Andy had done it before. He had built up a big agency in the UK, sold it, and then moved to the U.S. and became a citizen in the U.S. But Andy always had a growth mindset, and it was always grow, grow, grow.
Yeah.
Never stop growing. Whereas I think where a lot of entrepreneurs get, stalled out is oftentimes they're a sole proprietor. They're doing it themselves. And a level of complacency hits in. Like all of a sudden you've hit that income goal, and you're like, my kids are in the private school I wanted to be in. I'm now a member at the country club I always wanted to be in. I've got a great car. I've got, they hit a level of enough. Yeah, it's good. But that's where I think companies start to wither. And I saw it all the time when I was out looking to buy agencies.
Yeah,
and you could see the real profile, of I think the kind of the founder complacency. And I think if I'd been my own, but Andy was able, because I was really the front guy on the sales of clients, and Andy was kind of more the back office guy. But Andy had the belief of it. He was the one who said, now we open in Asia. Now we got to open in Europe. And there was just the constant foot on the gas, for growth. But that led to big things for us. But, I do think you have to, and you've probably seen this, Bruce. I always tell people when I'm speaking, look, growth is a decision. And it's a decision. And it's a decision that comes with steps that you have to take. And it's not always easy. And I remember there were times when we were making some big bets where we were paying people more than ourselves. We brought in a guy who said he could launch and build a corporate practice. And, he was making close to double what we were making. And, it's funny, and you've been doing this a long time too. I find I get a look of horror when I tell that story to other entrepreneurs, because they're like, there's no effing way that I would be paying somebody more than me. And you've got to invest in the business. And that's why I always say growth doesn't just happen. Growth is a decision. And I think you have to push through these walls of complacency.
Yeah.
Enough.
Well, there's kind of I might certainly have this kind of philosophy. If you're not growing, you're shrinking, right? Like this,
if you're not growing, you're dying. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, your employees want to grow. Your employees don't want to stay in the same position for the next 30 years, right? They want
absolutely.
new, bigger opportunities.
I've always said,
you got to create it.
There's the sports analogy too, that, growing is like winning. It's like and winning cures all. And people in business, growing is winning.
Yeah. No, there's a kind of a natural propensity to that. So I think it's good to embrace. Tell me a little bit about some of the acquisitions. I mean, you kind of alluded to it here. It's like you took advantage of that in terms of the founder complacency. I guess how did acquisitions play a role in your growth? And then how was your approach?
It played a huge role. And it's funny because going back to the earliest days, and it was funny. So it was 2002, summer of 2002, and we're not in good shape. I mean, I still remember Andy knocking on the door, coming, and he goes, "Here's the deal. We have $3,000 in the bank, and we have a $40,000 payroll next week." It was a scramble, and Bruce, I was all in, had gone through my life savings, was paying the mortgage on my credit card, all the stuff you're not supposed to do.
Exactly.
And I get a call from a gal, Patrice Pazinski, and she was connected to us. She said, my husband had a small PR firm in San Francisco.
Yeah.
He went out for a jog and had a massive heart attack and passed away.
Oh, no.
And she said, would you like to take over my company, my husband's company? Yeah. And I said, Patrice, I'm so sorry for your loss. I can barely keep my own nose above water. Yeah. And I think you should go find a better opportunity. And, she kept coming back and we kept talking. She said, you just remind me of my husband and what he had done. I think you'd be a great fit. So in July of 2002, we acquired the Montgomery Group, mainly through, we gave stock to Patrice and kind of a commission on the portfolio. Mm-hmm. And true story, Bruce, we were profitable then for the first time in July of 2002. We've been profitable every month since.
Yeah.
There's some karma in this world, And, the nice thing is we set up a scholarship for Patrice's, former husband. It still exists today.
Yeah.
And that kind of got us on the mindset of acqui-hires. And so in the early days, we didn't have we had very little resources. So we did small acquisitions through an acqui-hire model, not much cash up front, but, worked for them because oftentimes small payment, plus they'd get a commission on all their clients that came across. So we did 6 of those from '01 to 2010, all in the U.S., and, really helped us, expand in the U.S. Then when we went into Asia and Europe, that's in 2010, we sold a stake in the business to MDC, which is a publicly traded, holding company. They gave us the resources to be able to go after bigger things. So we bought a company in Beijing and a 20-person agency, and that gave us the ability to plant the flag in Asia and expand. Yeah. We bought a firm in Japan, and then we bought a couple of strategic agencies in London. So, but those were all kind of like big boy deals where you're actually, writing checks. And so it was a big part of the growth plan, in addition to real strong organic growth. Like we always found, if you build it, they will come. And we had clients that, oh, wow, you guys are in Asia now. Yeah, we need help there. Oh, wow, you're in Paris. Wow, we need help there. So,
well, I'm kind of curious, and maybe it shifted between the earlier ones and the later ones, like the motivation for doing the hires. Was it, you talked about acquiring talent, but was this particular capabilities? Was this geography?
It's capabilities, absolutely.
List?
And we kind of had, we called it the vertical and the horizontal approach. Yeah. So we wanted to expand services, keep studying what chief marketing officers were looking for, and making sure that we had an expanded roster of offering, and then the dots on the map, making sure there were markets. So we wanted to be able to compete with the largest PR firms in the world, but still say, hey, we're still kind of a boutique global firm. The founders of the company are here, and we kind of built off that and started getting much bigger engagements.
Yeah. For the bigger deals, just in terms of the mechanics of the deals, like what were you looking for? What tended to make a deal work? I mean, to the extent that you had deals that didn't actually, cross the finish line, like what got in the way? I'm just kind of curious on the buy side, what you kind of learned as the whole kind of acquisition
it's funny. It was a lot easier in the U.S., and I found the pricing was much more favorable. Asia was particularly expensive. You'd have a lot of companies that were looking for like a 10x off EBITDA.
Why? Because they knew they could demand it, or something?
Yeah, it was kind of a limited, commodity. Yeah. So, and Europe more expensive than the U.S. So you had to kind of wade through that to find deals, and then find where you could do something. We always try to focus on something more of the 4 or 5x. Which we found is more traditional in our industry. And, but there was definitely deals that got done and deals that I would have loved to have, but we just couldn't compete.
Yeah.
Financially.
From a financing point of view. You just couldn't, you couldn't.
And on our industry, it really changed. So when I sold a stake in 2010, there weren't that many buyers. You flash forward today, private equity's involved. There's just so many more people involved in the acquisition side that it just got more expensive.
Yeah. And so then I'm curious, when did you, I guess when did you first feel or sense or realize you had an asset that was sellable? Like when did it kind of cross your mind?
We started,
at some point I'm going to sell this.
Yeah. And, Andy, again, was kind of the belief. He goes, look, I've seen how this plays out. You want to build, grow, and sell at some point. Yeah. Capitalize on that. And I think it was about 2008 or 9 when we started getting people kind of sniffing around, asking about, taking meetings, and by and large, we didn't feel that comfortable with a lot of places. We thought we would really lose the growth opportunity. MDC had a great model where they would take a 51% stake. But in talking to their portfolio, the companies were like, God, we don't even know these guys are there. It's a very light touch.
Silent partners. Yeah.
They're a light touch, focus on growth. What do you need to keep building? And so it was a great venture for us, because as we knew we were going into Asia and Europe, Bruce, the business was secured by our homes. You kind of reach a point where you don't want that much personal risk. Yeah. And to have a partner that gave us the ability to finance and to grow, that was huge.
Yeah. What else kind of came into consideration for you in that deal, and like things you were worried about, or nature of the deal, or terms that were...
You realize that I was probably late 40s back then, and I had seen firsthand a lot of agencies, even a place that I originally worked, where you're one recession away from being taken out, and seeing people that maybe had owned an agency for 25 years and then getting cleaned out and having to rebuild. And so I knew that I wanted to take some money off the table. I wanted to be able to secure retirement, kids' college, all that stuff. And, no regrets. That was a big part of it. And, I always joked that it was maybe the longest earnout in history because it went from 2010 and we didn't finish it until 2021.
Yeah.
But it was a multiple against EBITDA. And as the company kept expanding, the payments got, bigger and bigger over time.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We're very blessed. We did very well kind of on the earnout piece. And that was important because I know a lot of agency folks that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I can sit here today and now I kind of can do what I want. And I'm really focused on passion projects and that was never been possible if you hadn't done the sale.
Yeah. So you did that deal, but stayed on obviously operationally, continued to run the business. At what point did you kind of transition to, at some point I don't actually want to be involved operationally and run the business anymore? When did that start to cross your mind?
It was kind of like the earnout finished in 21 and then Andy and I were given a 2-year contract to kind of to stay on board. It took us through 23.
Yeah.
And at that point I said, I kind of want to give up the CEO job.
Yeah.
I want to elevate to chairman and, really kind of groom, the bench. And I spent all of 24 doing that. But, you got around to about October 24 and I was in Greece with my wife, who really has always taken she's an amazing partner and a huge part of my success, kind of the rock that held everything together. But, for the first time she said, I'm questioning a bit kind of your happiness level and questioning why you would stick with this. And actually pulled out the pen and paper and said, let's make the list. And it became a pretty short list, honestly. It was really focused on, I really love the people here. And my wife said, you know what? You always will.
Yeah.
And I kind of at that moment said, I think it's time to call it a career on this particular endeavor. I think it's run its full course. Yeah. And made the decision, the end of, 24, that I would fully retire in May of this year.
Yeah. 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 It's an interesting realization and reeling process. And the role your wife played in kind of being that kind of sounding board and reflector board. Because my personal experience, I probably stayed a year too long, right? Like I probably was ready a year before I did it.
I could have, you could have. My wife would probably chime in now and say, oh yeah, Bruce, he was a year too long on this. Yeah, for sure.
But, and I think that's lucky. I mean, I've seen founders that stay on, 2, 3, 4,
Absolutely.
5, that stay, and it's funny because it's not, it's a combination of their own kind of, leadership skills, capacity. Like it's very different running, a $50 million business than a $500 million business, right? Like it's just, what are they good at? But also they just get caught up in this identity, right? Like their identity gets really entangled with the company and they can't think of themselves.
And I've seen some of your podcasts and what you've written about, Bruce. You're dead on. I mean, because we are wrapped up. And I think men are a little worse than women. I think there are women CEOs and entrepreneurs. I think they've got a lot of other identity points. I think we're pretty simple folks as men sometimes. And I think our identity is our career. And I kind of knew that. And I knew that it was going to take some real planning to make sure that it wasn't a total identity crash and become... they always talk about how their depression is rampant with men when they retire early. And so I kind of knew that and was very methodical of kind of mapping out what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, so you had at a point at which you kind of made a mental shift there. I guess, what do you feel like you'd already done by that point in terms of starting to think about kind of life after company, and then what else kind of came onto your list that you needed to do before you actually stepped out of leadership role?
Well, and it's funny because I always felt like that I wanted to get into film. I've been telling other people's stories for 40 years, and I always felt like it was a medium. I want to try to tell my own stories. And the funny thing is my goddaughter, Lauren, was a producer with NBC. And so I'd go back to New York. We have a big office there, and we'd go out to dinner. And, drink too much wine. And, we'd always be talking about, Uncle Scott, we got to team up and do something. And I said, well, I lived in London and I became fascinated with the Premier League and their fans. I'm like, this is like Yankees, Red Sox times 100.
Yeah.
And, we talked about that. And she said, I would quit my job to go do this. And I'm like, man, now this thing's serious. Her dad's one of my best friends. And so we just leaped in and Lauren quit her job. She moved to London and we started this thing. And I knew that this was going to be a great natural evolution to have this film production company. I also used to do a lot of writing. I've written, a couple novels, but it's been a long time. I kind of want to get back to some of those things. I'm really passionate about working with founders and entrepreneurs and really helping them on their presentation skills. I think presentation is a dying art. Yeah. I think a lot of executives, I know you've seen this, they're not good in presentations and really kind of help them get over the top and things like that. So I've got things that I really enjoy doing that I'll continue to do. But I was very methodical of, all right, I know what's what, having a plan, making sure this transition's pretty smooth. And look, I'm only 2 weeks into it, but I think it's heading in the right direction. I think it's kind of what I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
You commute to the city. I spent 25 years commuting to San Francisco. Oh, geez. It's 2.5 hours a day. You kind of want to change. The travel was off the charts. I mean, go back to right before COVID, 18, 19, it was 200 nights a year on the road. And that's a young person's game to a certain point, you realize this is a bit much.
Oh yeah. No, I've been there. Yeah. I find this whole kind of process, it's a little bit like driving a manual transmission, right? Like you it's a combination. How much gas do I give my next thing versus how much brake do I give the thing? It's like kind of, I got to play. And if I'm too far ahead, right, then I'm neglecting kind of my current responsibilities. If I don't do enough, then I'm going to stall out and I'm going to be in this kind of limbo for too long. How did you balance that?
I kept telling you, I had this great business coach, Nigel Lineker, out of the UK, and he was a business coach for 15 years. And we talked at length about this concept of gradually bringing the jet down. Uh-huh. You can't go from 100 miles an hour to zero. And kind of the gradual steps and kind of what that would look like, and kind of mapped out that strategy.
Yeah. What anything that you would have done differently now? Like now that you're kind of where you are now, you wish you would have prepared a little bit more for or done differently?
No, I think I was pretty methodical about it, Bruce. I was not really. It was pretty intensely thought out, and I started out with this concept of it's the big fun. And throwing every idea, every kind of interest at the top of the funnel. And then you kind of get some of the kind of like, well, that's not a good idea. I'm not going to do that. At one point I said, I'd like to buy a racehorse, and then you're like, that's not a good idea. So I think the funnel starts on that one.
Like what did you do to learn that wasn't a good idea? Because this is interesting because I think there's work you can do to validate, test, some of these ideas, and you can do it pretty quickly. And so something happened that told you that.
Well, it's a funny story. I always joke that I learned how to read in a racetrack form with my dad. My dad was a big horse player.
Yeah.
And he would take my brother and I, oftentimes unbeknownst to my mom, to the track. We're about 5 years old and learning how to read a racing form. So, I always loved horse racing. Yeah. But then when I got some books and started studying, started talking to some people, it might be one of the world's worst investments. So, you kind of start reducing things, like that. At one point too, my wife and I, we had this long plan that we would spend 3 months a year living in a different place. And then we kind of determined I don't know if we want to live three. We've got a lot of good stuff at home, and we've got, family, and so we have a place in Kauai, and we spend a lot of time there. So we're like, no, I don't think we're going to go with 3 months a year in a different location. You're going to kind of so I think you're constantly adjusting and refocusing and adapting. My son's been spending more. He's in real estate, and he was like, Dad, let's start looking at some startups. So we actually made an offer to a SaaS software company a couple of weeks ago, and we literally got outbid from thinking a deal was done at 10 o'clock at night till 6 the next morning. And somebody came and photo finished us. And, but I think you just continue, look, I came in with an open mindset of, I want to just continue to talk, listen, learn, grow, open, don't be closed-minded to any kind of opportunity, but also quickly filter out things. You're like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in terms of kind of the transition for you, kind of more emotionally or from a, just kind of your role in the world, like, I find a lot of times CEOs, particularly, bigger company CEOs, it's a bit of a transition, right? They're used to a lot of resources. They're used to, networks. They're used to reputation, and, they step out of these roles and it's quite different. I guess, what did you notice? How did you make that transition?
It's funny. I was playing tennis one time with a guy. We were in this league, and he was the general counsel for Chevron. Big job.
Yep.
And he told me, he said, I went from 400 emails on Friday to 0 on Monday. And he said he goes, it took 6 months in therapy to kind of get me through, kind of that quiet. So, when you have these epiphanies and you kind of file that away and you understand that. But even, going from in this 2-week transition, you see it drop off. And we're so conditioned to, like, I would have to check Teams and this and that and the other. Like, you almost have this kind of thing. And wait a minute, I don't have to check as much stuff. But, I very quickly, I was on calls this morning on the movie, and some things we're working at from a marketing standpoint. So I think but if you went from high volume to no volume, that's tough.
Yeah,
you got to go in with your eyes open, on that.
Yeah, no, it's a big transition. As you're kind of looking at this next stage, what do you feel that you're continuing in terms of kind of role, skills, perspective, mindset from this into the next phase? And which one have you given up?
Absolutely. I'll continue to, the film production is kind of a life of its own. But, I really enjoy mentoring too, Bruce, and giving advice. I spoke just this morning to another agency, a smaller firm, and they're like, man, we love your journey. Would you come and do a presentation to our group? And I said, absolutely. I love sharing the story. I love sharing ideas. I love being a sounding board. So I think I would, continue to do that. I'm having lunch with a guy today who said, I think I'd like to consider selling my agency. Could you, walk me through some ideas and the approach? And that's really enjoyable.
Yeah. And, so let's talk a little bit about that, because I know a lot of folks that, listen to the program are kind of earlier stage, founder CEOs that, maybe it's 5, even 10 years out. But, what advice or what things would you suggest that they either think about for themselves or think about in terms of their company that, would help them either be better positioned or be in a better spot to be able to actually make a transaction or have options later? Like, what do you notice that either you did or you wish you did that you suggest to folks?
I think so, the suggestion is you have to have the growth mentality. Growth is a decision. I think it's a decision to sell too. And I think and I always say, look, in particular, I'm speaking more in the agency world, you don't have to sell. Yeah. I know a lot of folks, they run kind of what Andy used to call a wallet. It was basically, you're running a lot of your expenses through it. You're making a good living. It's a lifestyle decision. There's actually nothing wrong with that. Yeah. That might be the best fit for you. But if you think you are going to sell, that's not an overnight decision. Yeah. And you need to spend some time really going through and saying, is this business sellable? And I've consulted some other agencies, and I'm like, you're not in a position to sell yet. You've got it's an erratic model where looking 3 years ago, you killed it, and then the next year you tanked, and then you went like this, and it's like, there's not a consistency there. And that's definitely going to scare off, potential buyers. And I'm speaking more of our industry, Bruce, more professional services. Yep. But the gold standard is you should be showing kind of a 20% margin. There's also a barometer in our business called a labor to rev ratio. which should be, high 50s, maybe 60% tops. But then you're working with a firm, you see it's like 80%. And it's like, there are things
And what does
you
that
need
tell you? Like when you see that in a
they're
agency?
they're spending way too much. They're overspend. And you need to kind of get that the spending in line. So that sell decision, you really need to look at your business exhaustively and say, all right, is this an asset that really is saleable? And if not, what do I need to do to get ready and get it fixed? I've seen some of your stuff, and you talk about like selling under duress, right? That's we all know that's a problem. And you don't want to be in the duress mode when you're selling. You want to have to really thought this out. We spent 2.5 years talking to different buyers and really developing a comfort level and really getting to know. So when we finally made the decision, it was a well thought out decision.
Yeah. And what are we talking about? And like that does sound quite thought out, but what were you looking for? Like what was your order of questions and what would
it was really important to us. Like, this one company kind of wanted to say, we're going to just take you and shove this into another entity.
Yeah.
And I even hated I'm going to protect the internet, but the agency name, like, it sounds like Horse and Hound or something. It was like, my people would be miserable working at this place. So, there was a lot of meetings, honestly, Bruce, you'd come away and you just wanted to wash your hands. It was like, you felt like that was kind of a slimy kind of deal. And you knew that you would take a check and you would regret every moment afterwards.
Yeah.
And we finally found like a kindred spirits over at MDC that they were very focused on. You're the entrepreneur. You know what you're doing. Keep building. And they actually said, could you guys double your company? Well, we grew at 600%. But a lot of it was having the autonomy to build and grow. And that was incredibly important. Now, I know some people, and I've come across, they don't want to do it. They want to just selling out.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is all like, what is your situation? What are you going to do next? I mean, I've been in some situations. They've got something lined up, and like they don't want any earnout. I just want to, a really clean break because I need to move on to something else. So, a lot of this is what are your goals?
Which I think falls into some of the things that you talk about. If you're under duress, if you're burnt out, and you just want to sell and go, you're not going to get the best deal by any stretch. And it's I think buyers will sniff that out.
Oh yeah. And the good buyers will.
Yeah.
I'm curious if having these conversations, having multiple conversations actually helped you then make the final decision in terms of, because sometimes I find like, you'll have a company and they'll get an offer. It can be a great offer, but because they haven't really looked at anything, they're like, they don't even know how to evaluate it. They're like, is there something better out there?
Yeah, and we were fortunate. We had some good advisors that helped us, but I will say there's so much more opportunity now than there was then. And there's so many more buyers out there in the marketplace. But by the time we had gone through a pretty exhaustive checklist. And, Andy and I were both the type, we're pretty methodical. And we don't make rash decisions and kind of really think through, talk things through. And, it's the personalities involved. You have to have somebody like you really feel like you can trust.
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of this too. Oftentimes that's not the case. There's a lot of seller's remorse.
Yeah.
But oftentimes because you didn't really do it, you're so focused on the check.
Yeah.
Martin Sorrell was a famous, he ran WPP, which is the largest holding company. He was notorious for the night before closing, reducing the offer.
Of course.
Because he knew that the seller was so focused on
he's already spent the money.
They've already spent the money. Exactly. So, you got to know that stuff going in.
Yeah.
And I would say, don't. Even what I've been telling my son as we're looking at this, I said, you can't fall in love with a deal. You have to have a non-emotional response. You have to be able to walk away from any deal. And I don't care if you're buying, if you're selling, you have to take emotion out of it and really focus on you could walk at any moment and not look back.
Well, and I think, my strategy or, the advice I give, the answer to that is have all that stuff decided up front, right? Like you don't want to be making decisions at the last minute. You want to have your framework set up as like, here's my bottom line. Here are the terms I'm willing to take. These terms I'm not willing to take. Here's my bottom number. And then the deal unfolds. And if the deal falls below those numbers, you don't take it, right? But if you're trying to make you're trying to make in the moment decisions under time pressure, emotions, things like that's where deals go sideways.
And I think people think, oh, it's great, I'm going to sell, I'm going to get the check, and not understanding, and you've been through this, how excruciating the due diligence is when you sell your company. It's like, a proctologist. It is not a good setup.
It's like getting a root canal and a proctologist and a colonoscopy at the same time.
Exactly. And I remember once we were doing a deal, we were buying in London, and it's the night before the deal's supposed to close, and we've got the seller out. We're having a big celebratory dinner, the champagne, and I get a call from the holding company saying, we got a problem. And somewhere through all the due diligence had fallen out through the cracks that there was somebody that showed that owned a stake in this business. And they're like, oh, no, you've got to have the evidence that you concluded. So literally, Bruce, they had to go running back to their office 10 o'clock at night, trying to find a document that had been executed a decade ago.
Yep.
God bless them. They had, because I don't think I would have had it. I would have said, I have no idea. They had the document, and we were able to get the deal through like at 1 o'clock in the morning. So it's like, there's this, the due diligence. It's painful on all sides.
Yeah. Oh, I've had a couple of stories of people having to, shell out tens of thousands of dollars to get releases signed from people because they couldn't find some contract, and it is brutal. And people pay it because I got to close this deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's just going with your eyes open on kind of all fronts, and be very methodical and make decisions from strength, not from weakness.
Yeah. No, great advice. Scott, this has been a pleasure. If people want to find out more about you, what you're doing these days, what's the best way
Bruce.
To get that?
I've got AllisonCommunications@gmail.com is the fastest way to reach me, and always enjoy talking to founders, always enjoy kind of talking through opportunities, challenges, and happy to help at any time.
Perfect. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time
Bruce,
today.
It's great talking to you, and I really enjoy your content as well. I think it's spot on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.